Welcome to Batya on NewsNation. I'm Batya, and we usually begin with what we learned about America this week. But since it's Thanksgiving weekend, we thought instead that we'd take a bigger picture look at all that we have to be grateful for. One of the things Americans are most frustrated with these days is the divisiveness in our politics. We're told that we're at each other's throats. We're in echo chambers, a nation divided. But the truth is we're actually much less polarized than we think. Take abortion, an issue that the media and our politicians assure us is hugely divisive. Yet the vast majority of Americans actually agree on the major points. They oppose abortion bans, and they want it to be generally legal for about 6 to 12 weeks, and then generally illegal after that, except in cases of rape, incest, or where the mother's health is threatened. Take gay marriage, another issue we're constantly told is divisive. Yet its approval among Republicans has absolutely soared in recent years, from 16% in 1995 to 44%, including 61% of Republicans. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Americans want trans athletes out of women's sports and women's locker rooms. Most Americans want much less immigration and much more access to high-quality health care. On guns, most Americans are protective of the Second Amendment, but support red flag laws that allow the state to take away someone's guns when they're acting erratically. The culture wars are over. So why don't we know it? We've gotten in the habit, myself included, of assuming the worst of people who disagree with us on LGBTQ issues, or on immigration, or on tariffs, or on whether a president should tweet and how. Of course, we have all of the incentives on social media reward such behavior. So do our politics. The good news is it doesn't really matter, because no one can save us from our own penchant to demonize those we disagree with. We can only save ourselves. I have so much to be grateful for, starting with this show on this station, which seeks to find the common ground and have a better kind of conversation. I'm beyond privileged to work for a company that prizes fairness and truth above all else. And I am so grateful to you, our viewers, who have made that a viable business model. And I could not be more grateful to my team for making me sound and look so much smarter than I am. But like many of you, the thing I'm most grateful for is being born an American. Because even when my preferred candidate loses or my preferred policy fails, it's losing out to my fellow Americans, the greatest people on earth. Today, we look back at our most memorable and impactful A-list interviews of the last few months, starting with my sit-down with War Room host and former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. Here's part of that conversation.
I want to make sure that Jared Kushner and Witkoff get also the due credit they are, and I want to go back in time. If you look at this as a continuum of President Trump and how he thinks, I think this starts to make more sense. The underpinnings of this are commercial relationships and actually building middle class and working class throughout the world, in this case in the Middle East. If you go back to our very first trip in May of 2017, of which, by the way, you remember Qatar was kind of odd man out because they wouldn't step forward and really do what UAE, Saudis working with us about terror financing. But the whole underpinning of that was a new dawn to kind of put the politics aside for a second, and let's look at the economic vitality of the region, particularly post-oil. You know, what's the region going to do? How's it going to expand? And Israel as a potential technology partner. Then you have the Abraham Accords. Jared's kind of the architect of that for President Trump. The Abraham Accords is essentially not a political deal. It's an economic deal. It tries to integrate the commercial relationships, the jet flights, the capital markets, trade in the region. And I think this is one of the reasons that it never really got, first it was President Trump, obviously, but the diplomatic and kind of political people that write about this don't really understand it. It's more of a business deal the way Jared had always thought of it. Then you cut to the first trip in the spring to the Gulf Emirates, to Saudi Arabia and to Qatar, and also to UAE. All of that was about building commercial relationships between the United States and the Gulf Emirates, but also the potential that we could have peace. And if we had peace, we'd have broader commercial relationships. That is what's underpinning this deal today. It's really that, you know, the Palestinians are not going to leave. There's going to be a massive redevelopment. The Arab nations, the Gulf Emirates, essentially putting up the money. The Turkey and others are going to provide the security. So I think if you look at his commercial relationships, this has a beginning with President Trump and how he thinks, and Jared Kushner, who I think Jared is really the unspoken hero and back of President Trump and really working on this. It's quite brilliant. Now, that being said, particularly those of us that have been friends of Israel for many, many decades and have really fought a two-state solution, I think we have to face reality. What's happening in Gaza, I think, is the beginning of the proto-Palestinian or Arab state. The Gulf Emirates are essentially going to finance it. There may be some interim, 200 American troops to do some sort of coordination from CENTCOM, but eventually Turkey and others are going to be there. There's also blocked any more expansion or really the historic claim of Israel on Judea Samaria. That looks like it's going to be blocked. So I think this was a overplay by Netanyahu, and we are where we are, but obviously historic. And I think if you take it from the business perspective, the commercial perspective, he essentially took the power of the hands of the politicians, put it in the hands of the business people, and I think you're going to get peace. What I found most striking today of everything, you had people in the streets dancing, a very moving press conference or press briefing by the IDF, who I think are also been the unspoken heroes here. What they had to go through in this war against the Hamas, or what I call the Muslim Brotherhood fighting brigades. The actual spokesman, I think today, actually broke down in tears talking about, and this shows you how tough they've had this fight and how they were not looking forward to going back in there and doing what they're requested to do. And this is why I think the head of the IDF and Netanyahu came to loggerheads over the last 3 or 4 months. But when the soldiers of the IDF are in back of a deal and they have a spokesman that's in tears, I think that shows you how deep an issue this was and why both Israeli citizens and the Palestinians in the whole region and the world are celebrating Donald J. Trump. He's the only person that can pull this off.
One of the things that I mentioned in the editorial was how important this was for Trump in terms of restoring Israel to having support, both worldwide and in America. Among young people, support for Israel has really been cratering. I want to play you something the president said about Israel. Let's have SOT 1.
No president in history has been a greater friend of the state of Israel than I have. History has shown us that those who have relations with Israel have thrived, while those who have devoted resources and attention toward the destruction and even annihilation of Israel have languished. They haven't done well. Israel is not going anywhere.
So President Trump has really been at the forefront of making the argument that there's no conflict between being America first and being pro-Israel. He's very proud of his sort of pro-Israel bona fides. There is an emerging split among right-wing influencers on this question. Where do you fall on this? Do you feel that there's a conflict between being America first and being pro-Israel? And is the future GOP a pro-Israel party?
Let me give you a definition. By the way, I think the most important thing that he said to Netanyahu, because let's be blunt, Ron Dermer, Ambassador Dermer, who is a great guy and I know quite well, I think very highly of him, and Bibi at the end were not in the room, not in the deal. They really weren't looking for input from it, and that should be the Israeli people and the Jewish people in the United States to really embrace that. What happened at the end of this deal to make it happen? Dermer went to the resort, the Red Sea resort, but really wasn't a big part of the final negotiations. Bibi was not part of the final negotiations. The president told Bibi, you can't take on the world. And what he meant by that is that we're not going to be dragged into this as you take on the world. There's a huge difference between being America first and pro-Israel and being Israel first. And I have been I have a long history of being very pro-Israel, and particularly being a non-two-state solution, Israel's historic claim to Judea Samaria, and other aspects of it. But what happened here is you had the commentators and the folks who I call Israel first, that put Israel, and particularly Netanyahu, not really Israel, put Netanyahu's political situation at the forefront. And I think this came to a head over the Persian, or I say the Iranian situation, which we now know from the Times of Israel and detailed analysis of the War Cabinet meetings, it was 2 years before they got a bomb. This is coming from the War Cabinet as they made a decision on that night, and we kept saying that this was all a sense of urgency that didn't need to be there. I think you start to see a split right there between the America first and what I call the Israel first. And I would tell my Jewish friends, and I would tell people in Israel, I said, under 35 years old, you almost have no support right now, zero support. And a big, huge part of that is, as you know, Batya, you and I have talked about it, this progressive takeover of the universities, which is not anti-Semitic, it is Jew hatred, right? And make it very difficult for Jewish people here in the United States. So we have a massive problem. I gave a speech at NatCon, and in that speech at NatCon, I said, look, if you love Israel, if you support Israel and you support the Jewish people, the problem that we have right now is not in Tehran. The problem you have right now is in the streets of New York, of where you have Zorhan, who is a neo-Marxist jihadist with all types of money through his parents. We have no idea where this money's coming from. It's going to be, he's Sadiq Khan on testosterone. And to prove that is what happened on October 7th in the streets of New York, which the mainstream media has not reported. The War Room did. There was a orgy of hatred against Israel and the Jewish people that took place all the evening of October 7th on the second anniversary of the horrific attack. And you saw, I tell you, you saw what New York City is going to turn into. And so if people love Israel, if you support the Jewish people, people are to start getting focused on what the problem is. And the problem is London is coming to New York City. And after November 4th, when Zorhan wins, we're going to have hell to pay. It's going to be an inflection point in American history.
My question to you is, are there limits? Are there people who you would say, you are not part of this movement, you are not welcome here?
Well, I think, and you know, it's kind of, I don't determine that, but I think it's this whole movement's kind of self-organizing. I think the people are attracted to it, see certain common values. As you know, Batya, we have a lot of Democrats, particularly younger Democrats, I think are looking for a home. I think particularly as the Democratic Party escalates goes up the escalatory ladder in violence, I think we're even going to get more people. I think from the last election, you saw working class African Americans and Hispanics, and particularly a lot of men, because of the anti-male agenda or the toxic masculinity as purported by the Democratic Party. It's kind of self-organizing. I think, listen, so far, I think we've done great. I think the President Trump movement. Now, I would say my only difference in what you just said, I'm not so sure they're in the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. I think they vote for President Trump. They're MAGA, and they identify MAGA as President Trump. And this is why I am adamant in working on Trump 28. Someone like President Trump comes along, you know, once every 100 years. We've had General Washington, we've had at the birth of the nation, we've had President Lincoln at the rebirth of the nation, and we've had President Trump at the rejuvenation and reclaiming the nation. And so I think we have not solved, we're still the low propensity voter party. When we win, we turn out low propensity voters, and particularly people who are what I call low information voters. Not that they're not smart, they're just not that engaged in politics, right? But they see in a message of MAGA and they see in a message of President Trump something that will get them to the polls. And so I would say we're open to all as people come in, and you know, I don't determine this. Even President Trump doesn't determine it. So but we'll have to see. And there's always going to be skirmishes between people, you know, what I call inter-squad scrimmages all the time. And that's what political parties are made of. But I think as an organic whole, we happen to be growing. And I think in the Democratic Party, particularly as the Democratic Party becomes more violent and more kind of almost obscure in what they're fighting for, I shouldn't say obscure, it's the wrong word. They become kind of weirder policies, but more intense policies that are clearly anti-American. And you see, more things you see like what happened in New York City on October 7th and who they're holding up, the Luigi Mangionis, you know, the Zorhans. I think the more you see of this, the fight to remove illegal alien invaders from the country in Chicago and Portland and others, the more embracing of Antifa, I think we'll get more working class people to our side that are looking for the economic benefits of the American economy.
Remember, you can always catch my full A-list interviews with the hottest newsmakers on our NewsNation YouTube channel. Welcome back. In the middle of October, New York Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talked about the change in male voters, saying the GOP has managed to lure all the men into their party and away from healthy masculinity. When I spoke with Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy a few weeks ago, I asked him about the Congresswoman's comments about his party, as well as recent incidents involving truck drivers who do not speak English. We also talked about a lot more. Let's begin with this. Is AOC right that the GOP is luring in men by legitimizing their racism and their desire to be kings?
Right, because you have Republicans who say men aren't toxic, right? We want to celebrate masculinity. And what's happened with young men today is pretty remarkable. They've been told you should be responsible. You should respect women. You should get a job. You should work hard. You should actually go back to church. Be honorable. That's what they're called to do by this new movement within the Republican Party, and they've embraced it, which is wonderful. But I love your opening on the No Kings protest, which is actually a Hate America protest. Donald Trump, king, he won the 7 swing states, he won the popular vote, and then everything he's doing, he actually ran on the campaign trail. He told everybody he was going to do this, and the majority of Americans voted for him. This is just disenfranchised Democrats, but also George Soros is funding it. The Socialists of America are funding and supporting it, and so are the Communists of America supporting this rally. So again, it is the offbeat crew that lost and are angry that are going to come and protest and say Donald Trump is a king. No, he's just a great, strong American leader.
So speaking of work and jobs, you oversee a lot of truckers to whom you have become something of a hero. I don't know if you know this, but I've been talking to a lot of them. Your insistence that truck drivers have an English language proficiency in order to have that privilege of driving these big rigs. This is something that is extremely important to truck drivers. It's extremely important to you. You have just withheld $40 million from California over its refusal to comply. Okay. Can you explain to our audience why this is so important?
Yeah, so first, just like when you go get your driver's license, you have to take a vision test. And if you don't have 20/20 vision, you're probably going to be required to wear glasses because it's a safety issue. This English proficiency requirement, it's not new. I didn't create it. It goes back a couple of decades, multiple presidents. It's just that I've said I'm going to enforce the law and make sure that there's compliance. And every state in the country who wasn't complying has started to comply, except for one. California has refused to comply and said, listen, we're not going to enforce that rule. You don't have to speak English. You don't have to understand road signs for you to operate in the state of California. The problem, Batya, is those who are licensed in California, they can't speak English or understand road signs, they're getting in trucks and driving all through the other 49 states. And so they're endangering other lives in America because of the rules that California refuses to follow. So we're taking away money from California. We're going to drive safety, even though Gavin Newsom, again, cares more about people who don't speak the language, and it's frustrating. Kind of one last thing, Batya, you mentioned the truckers like what we're doing. There's been companies, family companies that have been operating for 40, 50, 60 years in trucking. They've been decimated. They're about to go out of business. We're losing the American trucking industry to a bunch of people who've come in from the outside who don't speak the language. They've driven down the prices, and now our standard truckers can't make a living wage because of what's happened. Like you, Batya, I stand up for the American worker. I'm going to support them. I'm going to make sure we follow the rules, and they can do great work but also earn a great wage.
John Bolton was indicted on what sound like some actually very serious charges of mishandling classified documents. Of course, presumption of innocence until he's proven guilty, but these are serious charges. He joins Tish James, Jim Comey, other critics of the president. I guess my question to you is this a scary time to be a public servant? Do you guys ever discuss this in the cabinet amongst yourselves? What's the scuttlebutt on these indictments?
Well, listen, I think it's important that everyone follow the law, right? If you're a Republican or Democrat, just because you serve the public at a high level doesn't mean you get a get-out-of-jail-free card. That's not the way it works. And I think if you even look back to Hillary Clinton and what happened with the classified emails and the bleach bidding of her server and not preserving records, you know, there was a lot there, and she wasn't prosecuted. A lot of people were frustrated by that she was above the law. Donald Trump was prosecuted to the nth degree, and he didn't do anything, but he was prosecuted. I think we want to get back to, hey, listen, let's enforce the law. People should follow it, and I think if that's the model, we'll see what happens with John Bolton. We'll see what happens with Comey, but that should be the standard that we all live by in America.
I want to ask you, what is your position on autonomous vehicles and trucks, and then on drone delivery of packages? These are issues that I know a lot of truck drivers are thinking a lot about. On the one hand, technology of the future. On the other hand, it has the potential to displace a lot of working class Americans from jobs that could secure them a middle class standard of living. Where do you stand on these issues?
Yeah, so first off, I'm bullish on autonomous vehicle technology. I think it's going to be remarkable. It's going to revolutionize how people and products move. I am cognizant of what can happen with job losses. Right now, there's some testing in some very short-run areas, especially in Texas, to see how it operates. Is it safe? I don't see, though, Batya, from coast to coast or long-run trucks being autonomous. You might have some short hauls, from one close community to another or within a city. Potentially, that's going to be the use of it, not the long distance hauling. Also, with drone technology, it's going to be remarkable. How you get a hot cup of coffee or how you get an Amazon package or a Walmart package is going to radically change. We're going to take cars off the streets. We're going to be able to deliver much faster, much cheaper. And so it's an exciting time. The way, again, products and people move is going to radically change over the course of the next, 2, 3, 4 years. I'm Goldilocks, right? I don't want to go too fast with regulation, and I don't want to go too slow. I want to get it just right. And that's the job that I have to do. And it's more of an art than a science. But again, this technology is going to develop, Batya, and it's going to be in China or it's going to be here. I want us to develop the technology here. I want us to win here. I want the jobs to be here. And so that's what we're doing at DOT, helping foster innovation, make sure it's safe, and see where the future takes us.
Coming up, conservative political commentator Ben Shapiro talks about anti-Semitism, President Trump's legacy, and the future of the Republican Party right after this. Welcome back. Ben Shapiro is known for his sharp wit and moral compass when it comes to the state of American policies and politics. He joined me a couple of weeks ago to talk about the Republican Party, free speech, and toning down the rhetoric. So there is a big debate happening on the right about how to handle it. Some are saying, like you have said, look, wherever this trash rears its ugly head, you have to denounce it, whether it's on your side or the other side. Others have made the argument that no, there are no enemies to my right, only to the left. We should focus on fighting the left. And when this stuff rears its head on our side, basically we should have a more tolerant view towards it. Explain to us that position and why it doesn't fly in the face of the exact kind of principles that the conservative movement has been claiming to be building up all this time.
Sure. So I think that it's really more a pragmatic position that it then refracted through a moral lens. So my case has been that, morally speaking, you ought to be able to condemn bad things wherever they occur. And then pragmatically speaking, you ought not hand over leadership of your movement to the crazies. And that when you make room for the crazies, when you refuse to condemn the crazies, when you massage the crazies, you actually end up granting them an unearned leadership position and making them essentially immune from criticism, which gives them an upper hand. And this is exactly what happened pragmatically to the Democratic Party. Not only is that bad for your party, it's also bad for your electoral prospects, because it turns out that most Americans are somewhere in the middle. Most Americans are normies and don't particularly like Nazi ideology. To steelman the position, I think to steelman the position would be to say that if you have members of your coalition who engage in edgelordism or have bizarre views or even terrible views, so long as those views are the second worst views, you must actually side with those people in order to fight the people with the worst views. And that's sort of a coalitional argument. Now, again, I don't think that succeeds on pragmatic grounds. I don't think it succeeds on moral grounds either. But that, I think, would be the strongest articulation of that position.
Now, you have people at your company, the Daily Wire, who don't necessarily agree with you about everything. You're a big believer in free speech. How do you navigate that? On the one hand, having the widest tent possible, really supporting the free exchange of ideas, and on the other hand, doing all the things we're discussing here, fighting racism, keeping the sort of pro-Hitler element out of your coalition?
Sure. So I think that, first of all, we should make a large-scale distinction between deplatforming and also saying that I don't have to pay somebody to work for my company who violates my moral precepts or the moral precepts of the foundation of my company. I've never called for some of these figures to be booted off of social media. In fact, I've called for some of them who are quite egregious and whose followers threaten me on a regular basis. I've called for them to be restored to social media after they were banned from X or after they were banned from YouTube. That is a far cry from the idea that I have to treat their views with any sense of decency or pretend that their views are palatable or that they have some sort of right to work for the company that I am a founder of. And that, I think, is a really silly proposition. It's the difference between a platform like a YouTube and a publisher, which is what we are. We're a publisher. We get to determine the kind of stuff that we wish to have on our website and on our property. That is a different thing. So I think that distinction makes an awful lot of difference because, again, it's not anti-free speech to criticize somebody else's free speech, nor is it anti-free speech to say that you do not wish to expend money or support on people that you disagree with.
We really have seen the right condemning the edgelordism, the people sort of defending, not condemning those young Republicans, for example, by and large, in my view, seems to have been more the influencers, more the very online right, and not so much main figures in the party. And you had, of course, the White House not nominating Ingrassia anymore. There was one notable exception, which was the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who refused to condemn these young Republicans. What did you make of that decision of his to sort of come out in defense of them, calling them kids?
So I think that there are two things going on. One is the vice president is obviously trying to build his own political coalition as he moves toward a 2028 run. He doesn't want to alienate potential voters. And that's not a rarity. You've seen that on pretty much all sides of the aisle when politicians who have electoral prospects don't wish to announce people who they see as possible sources of support. I think also that the vice president is making a calculated gamble that essentially there is more objection to what has now been broadly termed, I think wrongly, cancel culture than there is to some of these unpalatable and ugly views. And so cancel culture, first of all, I think was misdefined in the first place. Cancel culture was the idea originally that there are certain views that are so out of bounds that there should be social consequences that attach. And then we use the term cancel culture to describe the use of those social consequences for basically mainstream views. The Overton window had been shut so tightly that there were people who basically said that if you say a man is not a woman or a woman is not a man, that you thus should be hit with these social consequences. We called that cancel culture. That was then depixelated. And people thought that what cancel culture now meant was any criticism of any view. And so it turned into a thing where if you say, no, these sort of Nazi views, I don't like them, I think they're wrong, and I think they're immoral, people will then accuse you of engaging in cancel culture, which is, again, I think a misuse of the term. It's a category error. But if that is the broad perception that criticism of ideas or criticism of people is a form of quote unquote cancellation, you can see why a political figure might say, okay, you know what? I'm quote unquote anti-cancellation. And so I'm just not going to engage in condemning pretty much anything. Now, again, I don't think that the vice president is necessarily totally consistent in his view of this. I do think there's a difference between a private group chat and some of the public statements that have been made, or some of the people who are in the group chat and some of these open political candidates. But it seems fairly easy to me to deal with this in the same way that Winsome Earl-Sears did over in Virginia, who was running against Jay Jones, that attorney general candidate who was caught in a private group text saying that the Speaker of the House of Delegates should be killed. What she said, she was asked about this group chat with some of these young Republicans, and she said, yeah, that was terrible. And also Jay Jones, what he said is terrible, and he should stop running for office. I don't understand why that shouldn't be everybody's approach. That seems to me the smartest and most moral approach.
So what's next for the GOP? Do you think the GOP in 2028 and going forward carries on with the president's more FDR style of, certainly economics, but other things as well? Or do you see a return to the more Reagan free trade version of things?
I mean, I think it depends on the economic performance. I think if the economic performance continues to be solid, there's very little domestic cost to pursuing what I would really think are sort of favoritist policies in terms of economics, because tariffs benefit one group that's pretty conciliated or a group that's very solid at the expense of sort of a broader populace. That's what a tariff does. It's a subsidy to some at the expense of the consumption of others. If the economy continues to hold up, then that's an easy game to play, and it's a politically lucrative game to play. I don't think that that's the basis of the president's success. I think there's been an attempt to read into President Trump's success a referendum on sort of his economic policies When in reality, I think the reality is that Trump's success is due to Donald J. Trump, in the same way that Barack Obama's success was due to Barack Obama. And anybody who sort of just copy-pastes his policies and then hopes to remake his coalition, I think is bound to fail. This is, I think, my biggest sort of point of warning for the vice president is that every politician has to have their own coalition. And you can't just remake the coalition of the politician who came before. Hillary Clinton tried this with Barack Obama. It didn't work. And the vice president is incredibly charismatic. He's really good at his job. He's obviously incredibly bright. But if he thinks that he can just kind of take the Trump coalition and remold it and then just push out the same coalition, I don't think it works that way. And I think that you really do, as a politician, have to figure out who you think your coalition is and then work that coalition to a majority.
President Trump has been securing trade deals since coming into office. I sat down with the man making sure those deals happen. My interview with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick next. In the last couple of months, President Trump has secured historic trade deals around the world, from Europe to Asia. World leaders know it is mutually beneficial and strategically important to please this president, who has made it clear that the days of foreign powers taking advantage of everyday working-class Americans is over. Early this fall, we sat down with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick to talk about tariffs, trade deals, and bringing jobs home to American workers.
So we're seeing all these revisions up. You know, the economists were just dreadfully wrong about all of their worst prognostications, but also GDP is growing, S&P 500 reaching new heights. But the American people are not necessarily feeling that. In a lot of polls, people don't feel that things are getting better for them. Inflation is proving rather sticky. How can the American people expect, or when can they expect, the price of groceries to go down? And how does the president plan to get their confidence back on the economy for everyday regular Americans before the midterms?
So you start with drill, baby, drill, right? So for a huge percentage of America, the cost of gasoline, the cost of heating their house, right? These are core numbers. 30, 40% of their spending is energy. Drive down those energy prices, right? We have oil down in the 60s. The more energy we produce, which is key, nuclear, right? Like clean, beautiful coal, which he talks about. Stop closing coal plants, right? And produce the power to drive down the costs for America. We're on that, and that is going quite well, right? You're seeing gas finally drop lower and lower and lower, so that's going to matter, right? Open markets, so that our farmers can be more successful and they can grow and have confidence that they can sell their goods around the world, will drive down our costs here.
So you've already alluded to the national security interest in a lot of the reshoring of manufacturing that the president's tariff regime is designed to do. But some reports suggest that we've lost up to 80,000 manufacturing jobs since the president took office. Walk me through that tension there, that contradiction.
Well, it can't be true. I mean, sure, the first day, you know, you walk in from the Biden administration, and what happens on the next Friday, you know, they blame Donald Trump, which is silly, right? The tariff world is going to bring in the greatest building of advanced manufacturing. That it's not the country's ever seen. It's not even possible, the scale. I mean, just what we talked about bringing semiconductors, that's $500 billion. $500 billion is going to be invested across AI by each company. You know, you have companies saying, you know, you had OpenAI say, oh, I'm going to invest $1 trillion. I mean, these numbers are going to create so many manufacturing jobs. The stress in America is going to be, we have to train the 6.9 million able-bodied Americans who are sitting on the sidelines, right? Who didn't want to go to a liberal arts college. They didn't want to work in the marketing department of some, you know, company. They want to work with their hands. They want to get out there, and those jobs are coming.
Defunded by President Obama, vocational training in high schools, by the way. Is this something we can see the Trump administration bring back?
I think it's important to bring back, because when I was young, there were kids who really liked that. And when we stopped embracing those people for really who they are and tried to jam them into some other world, We lost them, and those are the just under 7 million able-bodied Americans who are sitting on the sidelines because they just don't feel that the jobs are available to them that they really like, right? Because we took auto manufacturing, went to Canada and Mexico because of NAFTA, you know, which was crazy town. I mean, it was so ridiculous to take jobs out of Michigan and Ohio and send them to Mexico and Canada.
This focus on blue-collar workers, I think, is very systemic throughout the administration. It's why President Trump won the majority of Americans who make under $100,000 a year. Working class people do really see these policies as putting money in their pockets. My question would be, now that we've seen this political realignment to where the GOP has become the party of the working class, and the Democrats now represent, 9 of the 10 richest counties in America, the majority of Americans making over $500,000 a year, why is the GOP still cutting taxes for the rich when the rich are Democrats and their own voters are working class people?
See, that's just a misperception. What was the key to the One Big Beautiful Bill? No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax for our seniors on Social Security. All of those things paid for, right, by the tariff revenue that's coming in, right? This is Donald Trump's sets of goals. They are designed to help those Americans who are the hardworking Americans who are working for tips, who are working for overtime, and our seniors for Social Security. These are that model. The fact that he kept the same taxes that he passed last time, they call it a giant tax cut. But the fact is, it's just the same taxes as we had last time. Nothing changed. He didn't give a tax cut to any rich person. That is just not true. The objectives are no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, to go for the union laborers, working class. He is the first Republican president who actually understands that hardworking Americans, these are good American jobs.
Last question. I want to play you something that the president said when he was asked about the future of the GOP and the bench and who he sees as the potential future.
We have a great bench, as you know that. We have great talent. And J.D. and Marco and Scott Besson's been great, and Howard. They're all, I mean, we have such superstars.
Mr. Secretary, are you running for president?
I am running for helping Donald Trump be the most successfully possible kind. I have 3.5 years to make fundamental difference for America. I sold everything I owned to take this job to help America. And someone said, what are you doing next? I tell you what I'm doing. I'm doing 3.5 years of being the most effective I possibly can to raise all the things we talked about today. You know, no one's ever brought in $1 trillion with their right hand and $1 trillion a year with their other hand, right? And go execute these plans. I have so much to do that I am just going to serve my president as well as I possibly can, and I'll worry about the future another time.
Coming up, I'll tell you what I'm grateful for this Thanksgiving weekend. It's been nearly 2 months since Batya launched here on NewsNation, and to say that I'm grateful does not even begin to cover it. From the guests that you saw today to Brian Tyler Cohen, Glenn Beck, Megyn Kelly, and Dr. Drew, we've had so many wonderful people join us from so many different backgrounds, and I cannot wait for you to see who joins us in the weeks ahead. While you see me on camera every week hosting this show, there are so many who come together helping to pull this show together every week. There are producers, editors, directors, stage managers, audio technicians, and many more people behind the scenes working to put this hour-long program on the air. I am beyond grateful to each and every one of them. Most of all, though, I am grateful to every one of you who watches this show, whether it's on NewsNation, on your TVs, or online. Whether you agree with everything I say or you disagree, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to listen, to learn something, to laugh, to enjoy. I appreciate every person who takes the time to watch me, and I so look forward to bringing you new, different, and more engaging content after the holiday weekend. Happy Thanksgiving to your families and to you. Thank you all so much. It's an honor having you with us. May God bless and protect you and the United States of America.